It happened on an ordinary summer afternoon in 1990 in the small Midwestern town of Riverside, Indiana, a place where doors stayed unlocked and neighbors called out from across the yard. A 9-month-old boy disappeared from his own front porch while his mother was just a few steps away. There were no witnesses, no ransom, no trace, only an empty stroller and tire marks fading into dust. But how could a child vanish in broad daylight in a place where nothing ever truly happened? The Hawkins family had lived on Maple Street for 6 years, in a white wooden house that smelled faintly of pine and detergent. Richard Hawkins worked long shifts at the local machinery plant. His wife, Joanne, stayed home to care for their first child, a baby boy named Luke. He was 9 months old, healthy, fair-haired, with a tiny birthmark by his left temple. Most neighbors remembered him as the smiling baby in the stroller, always waving his hands when someone passed the gate. That Saturday began like any other summer day. Joanne woke early, fed Luke, and hung laundry behind the house. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, the heat grew heavy, and the cicadas buzzed so loud that even the dog across the street stopped barking. Joanne wheeled Luke's stroller to the porch so he could nap in the shade. She stepped inside for a few minutes to rinse the dishes, leaving the front door open. Across the yard, Norma Lee, her neighbor, was trimming the hedge. Norma later said she noticed a white van parked briefly near the corner. Nothing unusual in itself, just another vehicle on the road. At 2:38, Norma heard what she thought was the sound of a car door closing hard. When she turned her head, the van was already moving away, sunlight flashing on the windshield. A few seconds later, she heard Joanne call out. Once, then again, louder this time. When Norma ran across the street, Joanne was standing on the porch, pale and frozen, staring at the empty stroller. Luke was gone. The call to emergency dispatch came at 2:41 p.m. The operator noted the caller's voice, shaking, but clear. "My baby's missing. Someone took him from the porch." Patrol units reached Maple Street within 15 minutes. Chief Mark Dyer of the Riverside Police arrived shortly after, leading 2 detectives and a photographer. They found no sign of struggle, the stroller upright, one of Luke's toys lying on the step. The front gate was unlatched. On the gravel road, tire impressions curved toward the main street, but the dust and heat had already begun to blur them. Dyer ordered the area sealed and canvassed 5 neighboring houses. No one had seen the license plate. By 4 p.m., the state patrol joined the search. A helicopter circled the nearby cornfields while volunteers combed ditches and riverbanks. Joanne sat on the porch steps, unable to speak. Richard arrived from the factory just before sunset, his uniform still covered with oil stains. He was told his son had been taken sometime between 2:30 and 2:40. Witness statements were recorded, photographs taken, evidence marked, a process that, at the time, seemed routine, yet every minute lost was another mile the van could have gone. As evening came, porch lights flickered on along Maple Street. Reporters from the local paper arrived, their questions quiet, respectful. Chief Dyer gave only a brief statement. "A child has gone missing. We're pursuing all leads." Behind him, the mother remained still, hands pressed together, eyes fixed on the road as if willing the van to return. The search went through the night, through the next day, and into the week that followed. Dogs traced faint scents to the old railway line, then lost them. The river was dragged. Nothing surfaced. The official record lists 1441 as the moment the case began. From that point on, every page of the file carried the same name at the top: Luke Hawkins, missing child. And from that summer afternoon on Maple Street, no one saw the boy again. The first 48 hours were the hardest to measure. Every minute brought a new theory, a new phone call, a new reason to hope and to doubt. Chief Mark Dyer, A man in his late 40s with a square jaw and the calm tone of someone who had seen too many road accidents, took command of the search. He requested help from the county sheriff's office, the highway patrol, and even volunteers from nearby towns. By dawn on June 10th, more than 100 people were walking the fields and riverbanks within a 5-mile radius of the Hawkins home. Helicopters flew low over the tree lines. Radio stations broadcast Luke's description on repeat. 9 months old, blue eyes, blonde hair, wearing a light blue romper with a bear embroidered on the chest. The scene around the house was quiet but methodical. Investigators photographed tire marks, collected soil samples, and dusted the porch railing for prints. Nothing conclusive appeared. The only physical clue was a strip of red and white fabric tangled in the wooden fence, torn clean, as if caught by a sleeve. Dyer placed it in an evidence bag and said simply, "We'll test it." At the time, DNA technology was still limited, so it went to storage, labeled Item 4A. By noon, the search expanded to the nearby highway. Officers flagged down every white van matching the general description, but most belonged to delivery companies, tradesmen, or families on vacation. No plate number, no distinct markings, no clear witness. One woman mentioned seeing a driver with a baseball cap and what looked like a tattoo on his right forearm. It wasn't much to go on. While the town searched, the Hawkins house became a command post. Volunteers brought food and coffee. Reporters waited across the street. Joanne barely spoke. She answered questions when asked, but her voice had thinned to a whisper. Richard handled most of the interviews, standing stiffly near the porch rail, trying to keep control. "We just want him home," he repeated each time. That evening, a storm rolled in from the west. Rain made the gravel prints unreadable, the roads muddy. Chief Dyer decided to stop the ground search until morning. Inside the house, 2 detectives reviewed timelines and phone records. They ruled out family involvement. Both parents had strong alibis. No ransom calls came. Nothing pointed to an organized crime angle. Still, Dyer noted in his report that the abduction was targeted, rapid, and premeditated. Whoever took Luke knew the window of time. Less than 5 minutes. In the following days, flyers appeared in every shop and post office across the county. The phrase, "Bring Luke home," was printed in large block letters above his photo. Church congregations prayed for the family. The mayor held a vigil in front of the courthouse. It was the kind of event that bound small towns together for a while. But by the 3rd week, when no new lead emerged, the attention began to fade. The search radius shrank, patrols slowed, and the case file grew thicker with forms and unanswered questions. On June 17th, Chief Dyer wrote his final note of the first phase. No suspect identified, no confirmed sightings. Possible vehicle, Ford Econoline. White, 1989 model year. The last line, written in smaller letters, said, "Family remains cooperative. Mother exhibits signs of acute shock." That entry closed the first section of the file. The town went back to its quiet rhythm, though something invisible had shifted. The porch light at the Hawkins home stayed on all night. Each time a car slowed near Maple Street, Joanne would step to the window, just in case. The search was not officially called off, but after that week, it became something else. A waiting game, stretched across months and miles, guided only by hope and the sound of a phone that never rang with the right voice. The first 48 hours were the hardest to measure. Every minute brought a new theory, a new phone call, a new reason to hope and to doubt. Chief Mark Dyer, a man in his late 40s with a square jaw and the calm tone of someone who had seen too many road accidents, took command of the search. He requested help from the county sheriff's office, the highway patrol, and even volunteers from nearby towns. By dawn, on June 10th, more than 100 people were walking the fields and riverbanks within a 5-mile radius of the Hawkins home. Helicopters flew low over the tree lines. Radio stations broadcast Luke's description on repeat. 9 months old, blue eyes, blonde hair, wearing a light blue romper with a bear embroidered on the chest. The scene around the house was quiet but methodical. Investigators photographed tire marks, collected soil samples, and dusted the porch railing for prints. Nothing conclusive appeared. The only physical clue was a strip of red and white fabric tangled in the wooden fence, torn clean, as if caught by a sleeve. Dyer placed it in an evidence bag and said simply, "We'll test it." At the time, DNA technology was still limited, so it went to storage, labeled Item 4A. By noon, the search expanded to the nearby highway. Officers flagged down every white van matching the general description, but most belonged to delivery companies, tradesmen, or families on vacation. No plate number, no distinct markings, no clear witness. One woman mentioned seeing a driver with a baseball cap and what looked like a tattoo on his right forearm. It wasn't much to go on. While the town searched, the Hawkins house became a command post. Volunteers brought food and coffee. Reporters waited across the street. Joanne barely spoke. She answered questions when asked, but her voice had thinned to a whisper. Richard handled most of the interviews, standing stiffly near the porch rail, trying to keep control. "We just want him home," he repeated each time. That evening, a storm rolled in from the west. Rain made the gravel prints unreadable, the roads muddy. Chief Dyer decided to stop the ground search until morning. Inside the house, 2 detectives reviewed timelines and phone records. They ruled out family involvement. Both parents had strong alibis. No ransom calls came. Nothing pointed to an organized crime angle. Still, Dyer noted in his report that the abduction was targeted, rapid, and premeditated. Whoever took Luke knew the window of time, less than 5 minutes. In the following days, flyers appeared in every shop and post office across the county. The phrase, "Bring Luke home," was printed in large block letters above his photo. Church congregations prayed for the family. The mayor held a vigil in front of the courthouse. It was the kind of event that bound small towns together, for a while. But by the 3rd week, when no new lead emerged, the attention began to fade. The search radius shrank, patrols slowed, and the case file grew thicker with forms and unanswered questions. On June 17th, Chief Dyer wrote his final note of the first phase. "No suspect identified. No confirmed sightings. Possible vehicle, Ford Econoline, white, 1989 model year." The last line, written in smaller letters, said, "Family remains cooperative. Mother exhibits signs of acute shock." That entry closed the first section of the file. The town went back to its quiet rhythm, though something invisible had shifted. The porch light at the Hawkins home stayed on all night. Each time a car slowed near Maple Street, Joanne would step to the window, just in case. The search was not officially called off, but after that week, it became something else. A waiting game, stretched across months and miles, guided only by hope and the sound of a phone that never rang with the right voice. Time, in small towns, does not pass. It settles. By the end of 1990, the name Luke Hawkins had moved from front-page headlines to the notice board beside the post office, curling at the edges from rain and wind. The police case file was still open, but it no longer sat on anyone's desk. Chief Mark Dyer kept it in the bottom drawer of his office cabinet, where older cases lay like sleeping dogs. Every few months, he would reread the reports, hoping a detail might sound different the 2nd or 3rd time around. Nothing did. Joanne and Richard tried to continue life as people do after shock becomes routine. She returned to work part-time at a sewing shop. He took extra shifts at the plant. Their house remained almost unchanged. Luke's small room stayed closed, curtains drawn, crib untouched. Visitors learned not to mention his name unless Joanne did first. Sometimes she did. When someone had a baby, when she saw a child about Luke's age in the grocery store, or when a program on TV showed missing children's faces. She began mailing Luke's photograph to national organizations, joining networks of parents who refused to let their children's names fade. Each envelope carried a copy of the same photo, a smiling baby in a blue romper, and under it, her handwriting, missing since June 9, 1990, Riverside, IN. The 1990s brought new technology, fax lines, early databases, national alerts. Joanne hoped one of those would make the difference. In 1993, she received a call from an anonymous woman claiming Luke was alive up north. The number was traced to a payphone near Chicago. Police checked surrounding neighborhoods, but nothing came of it. Joanne said later that she knew, from the moment the line went dead, that it was false. Still, for nights afterward, she kept her phone beside the bed, waiting for it to ring again. By 1998, the Hawkins case had become a reference point in local policing seminars. How quickly an abduction can occur, how limited the tools once were. Dyer, approaching retirement, spoke of it without emotion, calling it the case that stayed. That same year, a traveling salesman reported seeing a boy in Iowa who resembled Luke's age progression photo. The resemblance was close enough for the FBI to test DNA, but the result was negative. Joanne received the news with a nod. "At least it means someone else's child was found," she said, her tone neither bitter nor calm, just factual. In 2001, a warehouse fire in Michigan exposed a rusted van, white paint still visible beneath layers of soot. When local police ran the serial number, it matched the same make and model listed in the Hawkins file. Ford Econoline, 1989. The chassis was too damaged for further testing, and no trace evidence remained. For Dyer, who was then long retired, the discovery was little more than a reminder. He wrote one final memo before closing his notes for good. Vehicle recovered, inconclusive. Case remains cold. As years passed, Riverside's main street gained a new grocery store, a new gas station, and new families who did not know the story. But for those who had been there in 1990, the silence around Maple Street still carried a kind of memory. Joanne's porch light stayed on each night, as steady as the ticking clock in her kitchen. By the turn of the new decade, 20 years after the disappearance, the Hawkins case existed mostly in boxes, labeled, archived, and forgotten, except by one person. Joanne, now 50, still sent an updated letter every Christmas to the state police. "Any progress on case Ariv 1990-90-0612? Most years, there was no reply. But the act of writing was its own form of endurance. In communities like Riverside, people often said that the town had healed. Maybe it had. But for Joanne Hawkins, healing was not the point. She once told a local pastor quietly, "I just want to be ready when the phone rings, whether it's good news or not." And for nearly 2 decades, that phone remained still, its silence becoming part of the house itself, until the year it finally broke. For almost 20 years, the file labeled Ariv 1920-62, Missing Child. Luke Hawkins had slept in the state archives, its edges yellowing beneath dust and time. It might have remained there forever, if not for a project launched quietly by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in early 2009. The program was simple in theory, but revolutionary in scope. A national DNA initiative linking families of missing persons with unidentified individuals across all states. It was designed to cross-check biological samples automatically, using new software and a broader genetic range than the early systems of the 1990s. Among the thousands of files uploaded during that first year was Joanne Hawkins's DNA sample, collected long ago when she had agreed to participate in a pilot study. At the time, she had done it more out of duty than expectation. She told the agent, "If technology ever catches up, you'll already have what you need." In February 2010, an email alert appeared in the inbox of Detective Laura Myers, one of the younger investigators assigned to old missing person cases. The subject line read, "Partial match detected. Case Rivo 1990-0612. The system had found a genetic connection between Joanne Hawkins's DNA and that of a young man living in Wisconsin, listed under the name Aaron Miller, age 19. It was marked moderate to high probability. These notifications were usually false leads, cousins, distant kin, or technical overlaps, but the date of birth immediately caught Myers's attention. Aaron Miller's document showed he had been born on June 14, 1990, only 5 days after the day Luke disappeared. When she opened the digital folder, the data told a quiet but convincing story. Aaron's birth certificate was issued late, months after his supposed birth, and no hospital record matched his delivery. There was no adoption agency involved, no court file, no foster history. His parents of record, David and Ellen Miller, had reported him as their natural child. On paper, everything seemed clean, yet nothing quite added up. The detective read it twice before calling her supervisor. "It could be coincidence," she said, "but the timing's too close, and his DNA's nearly a mirror image of the mother's." That same week, the Wisconsin Bureau of Investigation was contacted to perform a field verification. Aaron Miller was located in a dormitory near Madison, where he was studying mechanical engineering. He was cooperative, mild-mannered, and visibly confused when officers explained they needed a DNA swab for a national record audit. He agreed, joking lightly, "I doubt I'm that interesting." The sample was sent to the national lab for comparison. While waiting for results, Myers revisited the old Riverside file. It was a lesson in how investigations once struggled with the limits of their era. The black and white photographs showed the Hawkins porch, the overturned toy, the faded gravel prints. Every report ended with the same phrase: "No further leads at this time." She imagined the young mother from those pages, sitting through each interview, describing the same few minutes of that June afternoon over and over. It struck her that sometimes cases die not because the truth is hidden, but because the tools to reach it have not yet been invented. 2 weeks later, the results arrived: a 99.9997% probability of maternity match between Joanne Hawkins and Aaron Miller. The statistic was irrefutable. The missing child from 1990 and the college student in Wisconsin were the same person. The news spread quietly through the department. Even seasoned officers paused when they heard it. Someone murmured, 20 years, and we finally have a pulse." The official protocol required the identification to be double-checked by an independent laboratory. Once confirmed, the next step was to notify the family. The assignment fell to Myers, who flew to Indianapolis to meet Joanne. By then, Joanne was 60, her hair silver, her posture straight but slower. She received visitors in a small living room lined with framed photographs of children she had helped other families search for through her volunteer work. When Myers introduced herself and mentioned the case number, Joanne nodded immediately. "You found something," she said, not as a question, but as fact. The detective laid out the documents carefully. She explained the DNA match, the timeline, the location, the verification process still underway. Joanne listened without interruption. Her face did not change until Myers mentioned the name Aaron Miller. Then she whispered at once, testing the sound of it as though tasting a language forgotten. When the detective finished, Joanne looked down at her folded hands and said, "Is he all right?" Myers nodded. "He's alive. He's healthy. He's a college student." Joanne closed her eyes briefly, a slow exhale leaving her chest. After several seconds, she asked, "When can I see him?" The authorities insisted on caution. They wanted psychological assessments, privacy protections, and gradual contact. But for Joanne, waiting had already consumed half her life. "I have been careful for 20 years, she said evenly. "I can manage one meeting." In the meantime, investigators sought to understand how Luke Hawkins had become Aaron Miller. The story that emerged was both simple and untraceable. The Millers, a couple unable to have children, had obtained an infant through a private intermediary, a man claiming to represent a church organization facilitating domestic adoptions. In that era, such arrangements were not uncommon, especially in rural communities. The couple paid a modest fee and received papers that appeared legitimate. They never questioned further. After the Millers' passing 5 years earlier, their house had been sold. When police searched it for supporting evidence, they found a small tin box hidden behind a dresser drawer. Inside was a single photograph of a baby wrapped in a hospital blanket, no date, no writing, and a tiny silver bracelet engraved with the letters LH. Joanne immediately recognized it from an old family picture. It was the bracelet Luke wore the week before he vanished. That object, item number 7A in the new inventory, confirmed beyond doubt what science had already told them. The file that had lain dormant for 2 decades was officially reopened under the classification Recovered Identity Pending Reunification. The notation was bureaucratic, yet it marked a miracle shaped by patience, persistence, and progress. On the final line of her report that evening, Detective Myers wrote, "Subject located alive after 20 years. Meeting between biological mother and subject scheduled. End of entry." And so, on a mild spring evening in 2010, with the same sun sinking low over fields that had once hidden every hope, the long silence in the Hawkins case finally began to break. Not through luck, but through a machine's quiet algorithm that connected 2 strands of DNA, and in doing so, reconnected a family. The meeting was set for April 12, 2010, inside a small, windowless conference room at the Dane County Sheriff's Department. No press, no cameras, no dramatics. Only 2 investigators were present as witnesses, Detective Laura Myers and a family liaison officer, while the mother and son, separated by 2 decades of silence, were allowed to see each other for the first time. The air conditioner hummed quietly. Outside, rain streaked down the frosted glass of the corridor window. Inside, every sound seemed amplified. The tick of a clock, the faint scrape of a chair, a breath drawn and released too slowly. Joanne Hawkins entered first. She wore a plain navy coat, the same she had worn when she first met Detective Myers. Her hair, silver and neatly pinned, caught the pale light overhead. She carried no flowers, no photograph, no gift, only a folded handkerchief she had held, since morning. When the door opened again, the young man who stepped in hesitated, not because he was frightened, but because the sight before him did not match the word mother he had imagined. He was tall, lean, his expression composed in the way of people who have always trusted the world to be ordinary. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was Joanne who broke the stillness. "You look like your father," she said, her voice low but steady. He blinked, unsure what to do with that information, and gave a small nod. "Thank you," he murmured. The liaison officer read the official statement required for identification. By verified DNA analysis, Joanne Hawkins is confirmed biological mother of Aaron Miller, born Luke Hawkins, missing since June 9, 1990. The words were formal, but they carried the weight of years. Joanne reached for a photo on the table, the baby in the stroller, the one used in all the posters. She turned it toward him. "This was you," she said. He studied it for a while, eyes narrowing, then asked, almost apologetically, "How do you know?" Joanne's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. A mother always knows. The conversation that followed was hesitant, built on careful questions. Joanne asked about school. He said he studied mechanical engineering. She asked if he liked to fix things, and he said yes. He had always taken apart radios and toys as a child. That small confession softened something in her. "Your father was the same way," she said. "He could never leave a broken clock alone." When she began to speak about the day he disappeared, her voice slowed, each word measured as if describing someone else's tragedy. "It was hot that day," she said. "I left you on the porch for a few minutes while I cleaned up. When I came back, the stroller was empty." She paused, staring at her folded hands. "I kept thinking maybe you'd rolled away, that I'd find you behind the hedge. But you were gone." The young man looked down, his fingers tightening on his knees. "I don't remember anything," he said quietly. "Only pictures of me as a baby in my parents' house. They told me I was adopted after my mother died." Joanne nodded. "They were good to you?" He nodded again. "Yes, they loved me." She smiled faintly. "Then they did what I would have wanted for you." The meeting lasted less than half an hour. Before he left, he turned to her and said, "Thank you for not giving up." It was the only moment when her composure broke. Her hand reached forward, just for a second, but she stopped herself before touching him. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "It was my job to keep looking." When he was gone, she sat for several minutes without speaking, then whispered, almost to herself, "He's alive. That's enough." Meanwhile, the investigative work continued. Myers and her team reviewed the chain of events that could have led to Luke's disappearance. The new evidence pointed toward an underground network of unlicensed adoption brokers active across the Midwest in the late 1980s and early 1990s. These individuals operated in a gray area of the law, arranging transfers of infants from poor or desperate families to couples seeking children, often for cash and without paperwork. Most of these operators disappeared when federal regulations tightened in 1993. Among the names surfaced one that matched an old suspect, Raymond Cole, a delivery driver who had briefly worked near Riverside around 1990. His personnel file from that time listed a tattoo of an eagle on his right forearm, the same detail described by witness Norma Lee on the day of the abduction. Cole vanished in 1992 after being questioned in another case involving forged birth records. Whether he died or changed identity, no one knew. When Myers presented her findings, the prosecutor's office reviewed them but found the trail too cold to pursue. Evidence was circumstantial, witnesses deceased or unreachable, and no financial records linked Cole to the Millers. The conclusion was grim but clear. There would be no charges, no trial, no confession. The file would close without a perpetrator. For Joanne, that outcome was less bitter than people imagined. When a reporter asked how she felt about no one being held responsible, she replied, "I don't need a cell door to close. I just needed to know he was breathing somewhere." To her, justice had already taken another form, not punishment, but restoration. Aaron, or Luke, agreed to occasional contact. He continued using both names for a time, explaining that he wanted to understand where each belonged. Therapy sessions helped him process the layered truth of his life. 2 families, 2 identities, one continuous thread of survival. He once told Myers, "I'm grateful, but I also feel strange, like I'm standing in 2 lives at once." The detective only nodded. "That's what truth feels like when it finally arrives," she said. On the final page of her report, dated May 3, 2010, Myers wrote, "Subject recovered alive. No further suspects available. Reclassification, closed, identified." In the space for remarks, she added a single line in her neat handwriting. "After 20 years, absence has a name again." That night, Joanne sat by the window of her small apartment, the city lights glimmering beyond. On her lap lay the silver bracelet returned to her from evidence storage, engraved with the initials LH, polished smooth by time. She traced the letters with her thumb and smiled, the way someone does when a story finally ends. Not with a sound, but with a breath released into the quiet. In the months that followed the reunion, the Hawkins case moved from the emotional to the procedural. The facts had been established. Luke Hawkins had been taken from his home in Riverside, Indiana, in June 1990, and had lived for 19 years under the name Aaron Miller in Wisconsin. But how that transformation occurred, who had arranged it, who had profited, and who had chosen silence, remained open questions. The Wisconsin and Indiana authorities formed a joint task review, not to reopen prosecution, but to close the record properly. For a file that had waited 2 decades, precision mattered. Detective Laura Myers was assigned to produce the final summary. She began by tracing every known link between the Millers and the suspected broker, Raymond Cole. Public records showed that Cole had worked briefly for a logistics company, delivering medical equipment across the Midwest. In 1989, one of his routes passed within 3 miles of Riverside. Company logs from that summer were missing, replaced with handwritten notes in another employee's script. A background check revealed that Cole had filed for bankruptcy in 1991, then disappeared completely the following year. His last known address was an abandoned trailer near Peoria. When police searched that property years later, they found nothing but rusted tools and a box of unmarked photographs, families posing with infants, none identified. The prints were too faded for forensic recovery. Although the evidence suggested a pattern, the law required proof that no longer existed. The prosecutors reviewed Myers's report and concluded that Cole's death, or disappearance, placed the case beyond reach. Without him, there was no bridge linking the van, the Millers, or the original abduction. The legal term stamped on the file was closed, identification established, offender unknown. It was an unsatisfying phrase for the detectives who had spent months piecing the fragments together. But in their profession, closure did not always mean justice. Meanwhile, Aaron faced a quieter form of reckoning. The college arranged counseling for him, not because he was unstable, but because discovering an entire past overnight can shift the ground beneath anyone's life. His sessions revealed what psychologists call identity duality, a lingering sense of standing between 2 selves, the person he had been told to be, and the one he was biologically meant to be. He continued to use the name Aaron in daily life, but gradually adopted his birth name, Luke, for formal documents. His professors noted that he had become more reserved, sometimes distant, but also more deliberate, as if measuring each choice against a larger history. Joanne visited him once a month, never uninvited. Their meetings were simple: lunch at a small diner, a walk along the lake, sometimes a movie neither finished watching. There was no rush to rebuild what time had dissolved. Both seemed to understand that relationship grows slower than revelation. When asked by a social worker whether she planned to seek compensation or legal redress, Joanne shook her head. "Money doesn't balance years," she said, "and the people who hurt us are already ghosts." The broader system, however, took note. In 2011, the Indiana legislature began drafting what later became the Child Record Verification Act, requiring DNA confirmation in all private adoptions and stricter oversight for birth registrations filed after home deliveries. Lawmakers cited the Hawkins case by name, describing it as an example of how easily a life could be rewritten without malice, but also without truth. For many in law enforcement, it marked the shift from emotional closure to institutional learning. Media attention returned briefly that year when a documentary crew requested interviews for a program on missing children found through modern technology. Joanne agreed only on the condition that her son's face would not be shown. "He deserves peace," she said. The program aired the following spring, featuring grainy photographs of Riverside in 1990, the White House on Maple Street, and Chief Dyer's old notes read aloud in a steady voice. "No clear suspect. Case suspended." The broadcast ended with a single update line. In 2010, the missing child was located alive. When journalists pressed for comment about the unidentified broker, Myers provided a carefully worded statement. "The investigation indicates a probable link to unlicensed adoption activity common during that era. We cannot ascribe motive or assign guilt with the evidence remaining." Behind closed doors, she admitted to colleagues that she believed Cole had operated as part of a small, mobile ring that dissolved long before 1995. The ring's records were gone, and its participants likely scattered under new identities. "If he's alive," she said once, "he'd be an old man now, and the law would still be waiting for a face it could no longer recognize." As the inquiry wound down, the task force gathered for one final debrief. The senior officer read the summary aloud. "Subject recovered. No prosecutable suspect. Case closed." The words felt clinical, yet everyone in the room understood the gravity behind them. They stood for the years a mother had spent searching, the cautionary laws that would follow, and the unseen cost of bureaucratic delay. Myers stayed behind after the others left. She slid the folder into the cabinet labeled "Closed Cases," reunited, then wrote on a sticky note before sealing it. "Truth found, justice incomplete." For Joanne, the end was quieter still. One evening she received a letter from Aaron, now signing as Luke A. Hawkins, written in the measured hand of someone still learning where his words belong. "I don't remember the beginning," he wrote, "but I know the ending now. Thank you for keeping the light on." She framed the letter, not for display, but because it was proof that the circle, however imperfect, had closed. The following year, she attended a small ceremony at the state capitol, where the new verification law was signed. Standing among other parents who had once lived through the same ache, she said nothing, only held the pen they offered her as a symbolic witness. Later, she told Myers, "This won't bring anyone back, but maybe it will stop another van from stopping at another house." The detective agreed. The law could not name the person who took Luke or the hands that exchanged him for money. It could not account for the 20 birthdays missed or the photographs never taken. What it could do, what it finally did, was ensure that the next child's story would leave a trail strong enough to follow. In the official record, the Hawkins case ended with a printed seal and 3 dates: June 9, 1990, April 12, 2010, July 18, 2011. 21 years of loss compressed into ink and paper, a reminder that justice in human affairs often arrives not as a verdict, but as prevention. For the people who lived it, that was as close to peace as truth would allow. Time did not erase the memory of what happened in Riverside, but it softened its edges, turning a once open wound into a story quietly retold at town gatherings and late-night kitchen tables. The Hawkins case had become a lesson rather than a mystery, its facts preserved in official archives, its emotions carried by the few who had lived through them. By 2015, most residents who remembered that hot June afternoon had aged into grandparents. Maple Street, once lined with white fences and elm trees, now had new families, new mailboxes, and children who rode their bikes across the same patch of gravel where a stroller once stood. Joanne Hawkins, now in her mid-60s, had settled into a smaller home closer to Indianapolis. The house was quiet, but not lonely. On a shelf near her living room window sat a single framed photograph. A young man in a college graduation gown, smiling at the camera, his cap held at his side. Beneath it, a small brass plate read, "Luke Aaron Hawkins, class of 2014. He had chosen to keep both names, saying it was the fairest way to honor everyone who had loved him. The photo had been taken by Joanne herself, her hands trembling slightly as she pressed the shutter. When she developed it, she noticed something she had not seen through the lens, that Luke's eyes carried a trace of the same blue as the summer sky in Riverside. After the reunion, life between them grew steadier, but remained understated. There were phone calls on birthdays, visits on holidays, quiet dinners when schedules aligned. Joanne never asked him to move closer, and he never promised more than he could give. Their bond was not built on recovery, but on mutual understanding. That love did not need to reclaim the past to exist in the present. Sometimes, on Sunday mornings, Luke would drive down for coffee, and they would talk about ordinary things, work, weather, the latest repairs on her aging car. To outsiders, they might have looked like any mother and son sharing time, only they knew how extraordinary the ordinary could feel. In 2016, Richard Hawkins passed away after a brief illness. Luke attended the small funeral, standing quietly beside his mother. The gravestone carried two names, Richard Hawkins, 1956-2016, and beneath it, Luke Hawkins, reunited at last. It had been Joanne's idea. "Your father would have liked that," she told Luke afterward, her voice steady but soft. He nodded. "So do I." That year also saw the founding of the Second Light Foundation, an organization Joanne started to support families of long-term missing persons. Its name came from something she had once told Detective Myers. "When the first light goes out, you must find the second one, the one that still burns, even in the dark." The foundation began modestly. One office, 3 volunteers, and a single mission: to help families navigate the bureaucracy of hope. They offered counseling, legal guidance, and, more than anything, presence. By 2020, the group had aided dozens of parents across several states. When journalists asked Joanne how she managed to keep revisiting the same kind of pain that had once defined her life, she replied, "It's easier now, because I know there can be an ending." Luke continued his life in Wisconsin, working as a mechanical design engineer. He kept out of the public eye, declining interviews, avoiding the documentaries that still wanted to feature his story. Privacy, to him, was not secrecy, but a form of peace. Yet he remained close to Detective Myers, who occasionally checked in, partly as a professional courtesy, partly as a friend. In one of his letters to her, Luke wrote, "People think being found means you go back to what you were. But really, you start over. Only this time you know how fragile the world can be." Myers kept the letter in her desk drawer beside the Hawkins file, which she never entirely put away. Every June, Joanne still lit a small candle on the porch, not because she expected anything, but because ritual gave shape to memory. The flame burned for a few hours and went out naturally, leaving a faint ring of wax on the railing. "It's for all the ones who never made it home," she explained once to a neighbor who asked, "and for the mothers who still wait." The neighbor didn't fully understand, but nodded politely. In Riverside, people had learned to treat the story with respect. Not pity, not curiosity, just a quiet acknowledgement that it belonged to everyone, in some small way. By 2025, the case was officially 35 years old, and its outcome had been included in several academic studies about the evolution of forensic tracing and the psychological endurance of families. The Hawkins file, now digitized, was used in police training seminars under the heading Reunited Without Retribution. Young cadets studying it sometimes asked why no one had been punished. The instructor's answer was always the same. Because sometimes solving the case means finding life, not blame. When Joanne turned 70, Luke brought her a new bracelet, silver, like the one from her evidence box, but engraved differently. It read simply, "Found." She wore it every day, the metal glinting softly when she turned her wrist. On her birthday card, he had written only 3 words: "The light stayed." The town of Riverside eventually dedicated a small garden behind the community library to missing children. A plaque there bore the names of those still unaccounted for, and below them, a single line of inscription: "For those who were lost, and for those who waited." At the opening ceremony, Joanne spoke briefly. Her voice was calm, her words deliberate. Some stories end in silence, others in discovery, but every story deserves to be remembered. As the crowd dispersed, she remained for a while, watching the sunlight filter through the young trees. In her bag was an old photograph, Luke as a baby, reaching for the camera, a moment frozen before everything changed. She did not take it out. She no longer needed to. That picture lived where it belonged, in memory, not proof. When she returned home that evening, she placed the bracelet and the letter from her son on her desk beside a note she often shared with new volunteers at her foundation. The handwriting was faded but firm. Hope is not the opposite of truth. It is what survives after truth arrives. Outside, the street was quiet, much like it had been the day Luke vanished, but now the silence carried peace rather than fear. The light on her porch burned steadily against the dusk, the same light that had guided her through 2 decades of waiting, and perhaps, she thought, would keep guiding others long after she was gone. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told and heard, stay with us. Subscribe, leave your thoughts, and share this video so the light keeps moving forward. Somewhere, another family may still be waiting for the sound of a door opening, for a name spoken out loud again. Tell us where you're watching from,